Welcome back. You're here with Invincible Goldberg, and today we're going to be dealing with an educational matter. My objective is to gradually recast and re-upload the older content such that it's up to snuff, and it has the double purpose to where they possess some evergreen value. So if I cease making content in the future, which is highly probable, folks who are interested in learning can still access, or if you just want to laugh and mock me, you can do the same. In any case, we have to tackle PhDs, as you can see from the little meme here, very sensitive subject. You've got some folks who go around saying, can you please call me doctor? I worked really hard for that title. Absolutely. Can you show us the kids menu? Just saying. Alternatively, I have a PhD. Yeah, you gotta have a Kellogg's box, didn't you? Came with that little Spider-Man game demo, maybe Wheaties All-Stars Baseball, a Finding Nemo toy. In any case, it's important to have an open mind. Well, not too open because then your brain would fall out. There's different ways to look at the whole concept of a PhD. The first is the financial, which is what I highlighted in this book that I wrote, and that is, ones and zeros. Is it worth for you and your bank account to be out of the regular workforce for a long period of time, making low wages, if anything at all? And then there's going to be more of the romanticized point of view. I want to be part of this whole cause, this research department, make my mark on history, my tramp stamp. There was that Rebecca Black song, "This is my footnote, my ibid." Nothing wrong with it. Now, I don't have a PhD myself. I didn't go that route, but I was still able to produce a couple of fairly scholarly works. The most recent was this one, which has gotten a lot of good reception. So if you have an interest in academia, I don't feel like you absolutely have to, as far as like doing research, writing books, you don't have to have a PhD for that, although it can be useful. Before we get any further, let's consider exactly what type of PhD you'd be doing. And for individual subjects, it's going to get a little bit more complicated. The length of thesis or dissertation you might do for a science PhD could be different from one that we do for English literature, okay? It's not all going to be the same. So if you go and say, well, is it worth getting a PhD? A whole lot of other questions you've got to answer before we get to that point. However, this girl, Jasmine Jane, she has a nice table that breaks down if you were to do one in Europe or Australia versus the United States. There's some differences. In the US, it tends to be that there's more structure. It's a 5-year program. Typically the first 2 years you're doing a lot of advanced graduate school courses. And that could be in lieu of a master's degree. Sometimes they'll award you one, not always. But that's going to have a lot more of a top-down, okay, do what the teacher says type. Then later on you get into dissertation independent research. So if you just gone to American undergrad, you didn't necessarily do an honors program, although you probably should if you want to get into a PhD. It's a little bit easier. Now, at the same time, you're going to probably be working as a teaching assistant for low wages. That can help cover the cost of tuition, or you can get funding. So it's a mixed bag. A lot of work, a lot of reading, a lot of responsibility, but it eases you into it a little bit more than a European one will do. If we go over to the land of potato cells and in Europe, you're going to see that it is usually a 3-year program. You're immediately getting to the research. This is why European undergrads and masters tend to be a little bit more demanding. And so you can't just be, oh yeah, I'm going to waltz in and it's going to be a piece of cake. You have to be self-driven. The advantage is it could be shorter. It depends. It could take less time. That's a lot of different factors there. Tuition, if you are an EU citizen, you might not pay much at all, unless, of course, you are in the UK, thanks to our friend here. He's kind of interesting. But understand that there's going to be a chasm in some cases between how much money you make, what the responsibilities are. These are all things to talk with the specific departments where you're applying, talk with the professors. Don't just say, well, I'm going to take it all off the internet, because it might not apply in this case. And it might not apply in your specific field. So that's why you have to do that appropriate research, as you'll be doing a lot of research anyway. There's a good TED Talk that I'll link to, and she's discussing PhD, she says, you have to go to the real source, not just what someone else said. Yeah. So good research skills are important, and you'll learn very quickly. So just looking into getting a PhD, that process is really crucial. Now, as far as income is concerned, BLS isn't terribly helpful because it's going to be industry or field specific, but there is this nice table from Michigan State University. No, not him, sorry. As you can see, depending on the field that you're going into, there's a big difference as far as how much you might be paid. These are all averages, obviously. Typically, science PhDs, you're going to make a little bit more. With science, especially, research, you don't necessarily need a PhD, but oftentimes to move up, you're going to more or less have to have one. It's one of those status things, just like in academia, you normally don't become a full professor with a master's. You have to have at least a Juris Doctorate or a PhD. That's just how it works. And I'll say, talking about like people I knew in college, it was a public school, to be clear, but he had a PhD. He was an associate professor, been there a long time. PhD from one of those communist schools in California. That was a USCLA? No, not Davis, not UC Hanna-Barbera. It was UC Bernie. That was the one, yeah. So that's where he had his degree from. And he was only making like $55K. A department head of another one in arts and sciences, $98,000. Then one guy, he taught political science, I think it was $130, and there was some philosophy professor making $150. But it's going to depend on the endowed professorship, how much money the department has, a lot of different factors. At private universities, you'll probably make more. You could always try to get into educational administration, and they make out very well. Again, depending on where you are and how senior your post happens to be. Now that being said, you look at the salaries, some are good, some are not so great. You have to consider you're going to be out of the workforce for a certain period of time. And that means that you're missing out on the potential to be earning. You'll get a little bit from your TA work, but it's not much. As she said in the other table we looked at, it was like $14,000 to $30,000 a year. It's not a whole lot of money. And it is going to be very involving. The girl in the video talks about being lonely. You have to do a ton of this research. You can't just say, oh, I'm going to kind of do a PhD nonchalantly. It's going to be a huge component of your life. Most of the people I met who were teaching assistants at my school said, don't do a PhD. It's not worth it. Or they were doing it and their plan was to go work for a think tank where you're probably going to make more money faster than if you are trying to become an academic, which of course takes a lot of time, and you're not guaranteed to get a full professorship. I knew another guy, he said he went to do a PhD. He actually had worked for Joe Biden, of all people. And he said, I didn't want to have to do any work. So instead he said, if I can just read and teach all day, it'll be easier. So different opinions. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but from the financial standpoint, a PhD is not advisable unless somehow you get through it really quickly, or it just leads to an exquisite job. There is also something to consider. Just because you like a subject matter, I think I mentioned in my book, you could like political science. Well, if you like political science in terms of, the election and talking heads, go work for Fox News or CNN, go work for a think tank. If you are interested in like theory, boring stuff, research, that's what you'd go into, because you're not going to be writing these papers like you would if you were a talking head on cable news, because that'll get you in trouble. You'll get shredded in an academic journal. Most academics, their conclusions, their articles are very conservative with a small c. They don't try to make grotesque claims because you can get in trouble for that. And also, at the same time, be aware that graduate departments can be very political. You don't want to alienate people with crazy views, especially if they are maybe not necessarily more liberal. I think it's a shame. I think we should have more balance in academics. So I'm not discouraging you if you have such alternative opinions and you want to go down the route, but just understand you're going to have to play it safe in many cases because they have a lot of power over your future. And that's one of the things people don't quite realize. They get into it because maybe they thought they liked the subject, but they're not prepared for everything it entails. That being said, PhDs, again, comes down to the person. Just have a clue of what you want to do, speak to the department representatives, the professors themselves, and get into contact with folks who are existing in that capacity, working as a TA, or are, have already surpassed it, and say, okay, do you recommend it? What's the experience like? Don't just go by, well, I think I'll like it because I like being in school, because it's a lot of school, and it's not necessarily as endearing or exciting as you might think. So if you have any other subjects you want to see discussed here, please drop them below, and have a great day.